All right, here we go. We're going to do this even without Eric. This is the AfterWord. The point of this is to look at the passage that was preached on Sunday, walk through that, and see ways in which we see more of God. We're able to apply the text and hopefully be a help along the way for the church. So that is the hope. I think I got that. Eric's probably not listening, so it doesn't matter really if I have it. I'm joined by Kirsten and also John File.
Who are you?
Oh, I am Vince. That's right. I should say who I am. I do that all the time. Whenever I meet new people on Sundays, I get their names, and as I'm walking away, they often say, "And what was your name?" And I forget to say that. So I'm Vince. So that's what we're doing. We were brainstorming, trying to think through some ways that we could mix this up just a little bit in Eric's absence. He's away. Today is day one of a 3-month sabbatical of rest, a much needed, much deserved rest for Eric and his family. We're trying to figure out how we could be rebellious because Eric is not, and we just wanted to rebel a little bit against Eric.
Maybe we just need some help from our listener. If there are things that would drive Eric just a little crazy that we could do for 3 months on the podcast. So it becomes a routine. And when he comes back, he's going to be like, "What's going on?
When did you start this?" "Oh, no, we've always done this."
We've done this for months now, Eric.
We'll start taking live callers.
Oh, that's a good idea.
That's a good call.
We could change the name of this and call it something different. How about God Shots?
Oh, yeah, he loves that, God Shots. He loves that.
All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with a question. Also, Betty's gone. Betty usually hosts this in Eric's absence. She is also gone, so that means that we'll fumble our way through this, and we'll all host it.
Well, I'm going to call John Betty today. I think that's, okay. I don't really see you as Betty, but just so it feels more comfortable.
Okay. They both have a tie to Japan.
That's true.
In some way.
That is very true. So,
we drive a Honda.
Gosh,
there's a lot of common ground right there.
Yeah, a lot of common ground.
Anyway, Eric is already hating this. He's coming back from a sabbatical tomorrow.
And re-recording it.
Yeah. Here's the question to get us going as if we need any help there. I was driving over here from a meeting I had, and I saw 2 men out on those stand-up lawnmowers. You know, the ones you stand behind, and it's looks like some Star Wars thing. The question came to mind: if you had the option to have a big, beautiful yard with lots of space, but it means that you have to do the yard work, would you rather have that or not much yard or no yard, but it also meant that your Saturdays were freed up with no yard work? What would you choose and why? Go.
Well, I think I'll be consistent here and say it's an unanswerable question. Well, it's season of life. In the season that we're in, we have a nice size yard and we've got boys that can mow it. If I was living alone or didn't have maybe a husband that could mow it, I don't know that I'd want a large yard. But I would want my non-existent yard to open to a green space that I didn't have to maintain so that I could still enjoy the benefits of a yard without having to maintain it. Is that good?
Perfect.
We have experience with both a bit. When we lived in Japan, we lived in apartment buildings. So we had small space, 900 plus square feet. And then we had community space. You get on the elevator and there'd be parks that the kids could play in right there that we didn't have to take care of. The kids could play and come back upstairs. So we really liked the simplicity of apartment living. But I would say now that we're in Fort Collins, now that we have a dog, now that our kids are a little bigger, it is nice. Like we have a little volleyball net set in the backyard, and it's worth mowing the lawn to be able to play in the backyard. So yeah, I've seen the pros and cons.
Volleyball on a balcony of an apartment building is not as easy.
You can only get about 2 hits before you lose the ball. Yeah.
And just to clarify, there were 7 of you in a 900 square foot apartment?
Yes, although the kids would have been Many of the kids were single digit age at the time.
They're still
That's still
humans
a
and bodies.
lot-
That's
a
a
lot
lot of
of
bodies.
people in a
Yes.
small space.
Yes, it's true. We at one point we had Sophie sleeping in her pack and play in the hallway. That was
Sure.
the best space for her to be in.
Yeah. Do you ever hold that over them? whenever they're tempted to grumble, do you ever, hey, listen, kids.
Do you remember?
Yeah, that's right. All right, good. Here's our.
What about you?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna answer.
And your name is Vince.
I'm Vince. That's right. But here's my problem with answering this. I know I'm gonna create some enemies because I have
Is one your wife?
no.
Okay.
Well, maybe. I don't think so. There are people in our church, good friends, who love lots of flowers and plants and the beauty of landscaping, and I really love that for them. My thought is I don't mind mowing. Mowing is not a huge deal to me, but I do not want to take care of plants and flowers and shrubbery. So as much as I'm able to get rid of all of the shrubbery and plants, I will do that. Sorry, JR and Hannah. That's what I would do. I'd mow it all down and plant grass and have a big yard to mow. I don't mind mowing.
Would you want to get one of those cool Star Wars mowers?
Maybe. I don't mind. I don't mind the monotony of going back and forth on
making lanes.
Those lines. There you go. Did I make an enemy with you?
No, not
Okay.
at all. You know me. I mean, I have this really nice idea every year to plant a garden, and then every year Vince is the one out watering it, weeding it. We have 2 hanging plants in the back. One is okay, and one is very dead.
Due to lack of care.
of watering, and so I think some of it comes from the person that you're married to. If we're being honest, why don't you give us a recap?
Yeah, let's do a recap of the passage. It was a longer passage. My desire on Sunday was to fly through some of it for a couple of reasons. One, because it's about a lot of different battles. Also, the other reason was we were battling our own heat and sweat, and so I was trying to make up for some time. So chapters 8, 9, and 10 is what we looked at. Chapters 8 and 10 coincide. 8 starts out with David it walks through all of David's victory over different areas around them. So all the different battles, some of them were brutal. Lots of people were killed. Lots of people were taken on as servants. Lots of animals were killed. Land was taken over. This was all a part of what God was doing to raise up a king who would take back the land that he had promised. And so that's chapter 8. Chapter 10 is inserted likely. Likely chapter 10 is inserted into chapter 8. So you have this jump over chapter 9. Chapter 10 picks up on a lot of those battles again, but gives a lot of the detail of the Syrian and Ammonite conflict. And then, bouncing back to chapter 9, you have David asking one of Saul's servants if there's anyone left in the house of Saul that he can show kindness to. The servant Ziba says that there is one, Mephibosheth, and his name is going to be talked about a lot today. So I don't know if it's helpful for us to come up with a different name. If you were Mephibosheth, what would your nickname be?
Fibby?
Fibby?
Yeah. Sheth sounds like
Sheth?
Seth, but it's kind of hard to say. Sheth.
I kind of like Fibby.
Fibby, not Mephib.
But
Hey,
it would be...
What's up, Mephib?
But it'd be Fibbo, right?
What's up, Fibbo? Which
Anyway,
one sounds better?
So Mephibosheth is the son of Jonathan. Ziba says, yep, there's a son still. The author makes it very clear 2 times over that he is crippled in his feet. He doesn't have the ability or use of, we're not sure what the use of his feet are, but he's the only one left. And so David wants to extend kindness to him. And so he asks or commands Ziba to farm the land that is left from Saul, that land would be farmed, the produce taken to give back to David so that David could have Mephibosheth at his table for the rest of his life. And so he would be treated as one of David's sons. David extending kindness. The chapter 9 ends again with the author telling us that he was crippled in both of his feet. So that is the recap of the passage, kind of a smashed together one. But let's start off with some questions, have some conversation here about this. How in one of the battles, so this is the first thing that comes to mind as we've talked through this. In one of the battles, you see this Joab, help me with the names here. I don't have my Bible open in front of me. Joab and Abishai, brothers are put in place. Joab to lead a battle against the Syrians and Abishai to lead a battle against the Ammonites. They make this commitment to one another. If one of us starts going down, the other one will come and help. And so they have this plan in place to come and help. But in chapter 10, verse 12, Joab says, let's go. We've got to be courageous. We're going to move forward in courage. And how is it, John? You have it open there.
Yeah. And then he finishes with, and may the Lord do what seems good to him.
Yep, and may the Lord do what seems good to him. So there's this confession of, we know that God is going to do what he's going to do. There's this trust, what seems like a trust in God. So both things, let's hold both of those things out there. There's this tension where Joab and Abishai make a plan. They have a plan of what they must do, and they also have this confession of, but God's going to do what he's going to do, so we need to trust him. That's a long way to say, here's the question. How do we make plans? How are we to be responsible? Have you had places in your life where you've had to be responsible and make plans, and at the same time, you clearly know God is going to do what God's going to do?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think it needs to start with prayer and just asking the Lord, what would you have? Is this something you've put on my heart? And then moving forward, I think often it's, okay, Lord, this is my plan. This is how we're moving forward with where we think you're leading, what we think you're calling us to do, and then make a way or shut doors. And so I think about when we were getting ready to move here to plant the church, we needed to raise money. And so we laid that before the church that we were at, and we laid it before friends, and we just said, here's what we feel like the Lord is calling us to do. And we were told that it would take 1 to 2 years to raise the amount of support that we needed to raise. And I think we were fully funded in 4 months. And so that was clearly from the Lord. And so our plan was to wait until we were fully funded to move, and then it moved a lot faster than how we were anticipating it. And so I think there's those times that you lay things before the Lord and you lay your plans before the Lord, and he makes it really clear, this is what I'm doing. And there's also times that you lay things before the Lord and he doesn't make it clear, or he shuts doors. I was thinking when we bought a house here, and it ended up being in kind of a high rental neighborhood with a lot of college parties, and we wanted to move. And so we put our house on the market and had endless showings. And it was during a time when everything was selling and our house didn't sell. And it didn't make any sense to us. And then maybe a year and a half later, we tried again, and it sold in one day, and God opened up where we are now. And so I think there's those times that we have plans and God either opens doors or shuts doors.
That's good.
Yeah, I would thinking about, in this case, in 2 Samuel 10, we get an occasion where there was a plan, like a contingency plan, and they entrusted themselves to the Lord, and the plan did work out. In our situation, we lived overseas in Japan from 2006 to 2019, and when we, my wife Sarah, beginning more and more to struggle with debilitating pain, we were having to make decisions. What are we going to do next? And our initial decision was a 2-year trip to the U.S., kind of like an interim trip to see if we could figure out some things for health-wise. So knowing what we knew at the time, we made decisions, including putting our stuff in storage in Tokyo, and decisions when we look back, we think, wow, that really complicated our life. But at the time, we didn't know. We expected that God would open doors for us to be able to return to Japan. It turns out that wasn't the case. Based on Sarah's health and other factors, returning to Japan didn't make sense. But we still had our stuff there. We made decisions, we made contingencies, thinking we would come back to Japan, and we didn't. But then God has opened up, obviously, many new pathways for us here.
How would you counsel someone who has made plans and they're waiting on the Lord, and yet it doesn't seem like God is making it clear what it is that they're supposed to do?
Yeah, that's a hard. I'd be open to all of your thoughts. That's a hard situation. I mean, I think we all get to those seasons or those places in life where we feel. Maybe I'll ask the question in conjunction with that. We feel like, nope, this is something we feel led to do. It can be hard to navigate. Is that from the Lord, or is that from me? Are the plans that I'm making plans that I want to make and hoping that God rubber stamps an approval on them, or are they plans that I truly believe God's going to make? Is that kind of what you're getting at with your question?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, as you're talking, I'm thinking of David last week, in him saying, I would like to build a temple for you, Lord. And the Lord said, no, I'm not going to have you do that. And that was a good plan. That was a God-honoring plan. It was a desire of his to bring fame and glory to God. And yet God said, no, that's not my plan for you. And so I think there's times that God says no, and maybe we're slow on actually accepting that or listening to it because we think surely this is what God would have. I think there's also times that there are two really good options in front of us and we don't know which one to take. And I think there are times that God doesn't make it clear and gives us the freedom to choose and gives us the freedom to pick what we think we want or what we think would please him. And not that that's outside of his hand, but I think there are times that there's not this obvious, like, this is the way, walk in it. And so when we are confronted with those situations, like, what kind of counsel would you give someone? If they have two very good plans in front of them, they don't have a clear sense of leading from the Lord. What's the wisest way to go about making a decision in those situations?
I do think it's helpful as we're considering even what Joab says here, or Joab says, may the Lord do as he seems good to him. That it's actually an obvious statement. The Lord will do what seems good to him. We believe that. We want that.
It seems more confessional, doesn't it? Like I'm confessing that I know that this is true.
Recognizing this is what is true. And so in a situation where you've got maybe multiple scenarios, there's nothing obviously sinful or dangerous or unwise or, about the scenarios, then you're stepping forward in some ways in faith, trusting, well, God is going to direct the ultimate path. It's going to be part of God, the story God is writing. And that we may not have that clarity up front. In some ways, it's taking the steps that begin to reveal what's next. I mean, even going back to that story from us moving away from Japan, all we really could do was take one step, and that led to a next step, and it led to a next step. And some of those were kind of crooked steps, because then we had to figure out, what do we do with all our stuff, and who do we give it to, and what do we bring home? But we just ended up, it wasn't a linear path that we would have planned, but ultimately it was God's plan for us.
I think a couple things. That's good, John. I think a couple things come to mind for me that we have either been programmed to believe, or whether it's sinful or not, I'm not sure. But we have to keep in mind a few things. One is if our step forward is towards sin, it's never God's will. And sometimes that's even hard to navigate, because I don't mean that that we ought to step towards sin. I just mean sometimes it's hard to know, is my heart in a sinful place? Am I actually stepping forward in a way that's sinful that I don't even recognize? So I know that can sometimes be hard. But if we're stepping towards sin, that's never a part of God's will. If the thing though that I think we lump together with that is, maybe it's just me, if God's leading me, he's probably leading me towards something that won't necessarily be the most fun thing ever. So we kind of group these things together. Here's a story to maybe hopefully explain that. When we were first starting at thinking about planting a church, starting a church somewhere, we began to think, where would that be? My only framework for church planting at the time was a church in this town would plant a church in a neighboring town because they knew that neighboring town was in need of a church. That was my only framework for what church planting was. And we lived in a place that I didn't necessarily want to end up living forever. And so that was discouraging to me to think about that God would, if he was leading us to plant a church, he was probably leading us to plant in a place that we didn't necessarily want to be. But it's God's will, so here we go. And then I met a guy who had planted a church in, I think it was Cincinnati. And I remember talking to him, and I asked him the question, well, just making small talk, how'd you land in Cincinnati? Did you live there? Did you live in a town nearby? And he said, no, I had driven through Cincinnati multiple times on my way to visit my mom, and it seemed like a really cool city. And so that's ultimately why we went there. It seemed like a neat city to be in. That to me, and I said to him, I remember saying to him, wait, you can do that? That because that was a new framework for me. And he said, yeah. His response to me was, yeah, why wouldn't you go where you want to go? And I remember going back to Kirsten and saying, hey, this is what this guy said. What do you think about that? And so it opened up a new world for us to consider. God actually gives us desires. And that's not wrong to have desires if they're not moving towards sin. It's not wrong for us to have desires. And so do we take steps forward toward what we believe are just as personal desires? If they're not sinful, why would we not step toward that? So that's what I would say to your question, Kirsten. How would you give counsel? One, are you moving towards sin? Are there people in your life who have talked to you about this? Is it they've brought up blind spots in your life? Maybe it is sin. Maybe I shouldn't move in that direction. And then two, what are the personal desires you have and maybe the gifts God's given you that line up with those? And could it be that God's opening a big door for you to step forward toward what your desires are?
I think, too, the fact that Joab invited Abishai into the conversation, especially in the church and in ministry, the number of times that we've had people come to us and say, we really feel like the Lord is leading us here, and so we're going. And that's the end of the conversation. And there was never any, they didn't invite anybody into the conversation. They just made the decision, decided that's where the Lord was calling or leading, or it's just where they wanted to be. And then they did it. And so I think the fact that Joab invites Abishai into the conversation and says, this is the plan, I think, but will you partner with me in this? And so I think there's a lot of wisdom in inviting people into the process, regardless of where you are in it. Yeah. And I think that's scary sometimes because when you invite people in, you invite a voice that may push against you or may ask hard questions or may actually say, I don't think that's what the Lord would call you to. And in that, I think it's an opportunity for wisdom. It's an opportunity to invite people in and to open it up for questions and really give the Lord an opportunity to speak through other people rather than just assuming that because you felt it or you thought it or you discerned it, that's the will of the Lord, but really inviting people into that process.
Yeah, because it may be that God is actually using those people to speak something into your life that you hadn't hadn't been aware of or thought through on your own.
Well, and that's what Nathan did with David.
Yeah.
And originally,
Don't give it away.
We haven't gotten there
no,
yet.
Yeah, we haven't.
It was last week.
Oh, last week. That's right. This coming week, it's getting there again.
Different. No, but last week, David went to Nathan and said, "I'd like to build a temple for the Lord," and Nathan said, "Go for it. That sounds great." And then Nathan actually heard from the Lord, and the Lord said, "No, I'm not going to use David." And so Nathan went back to David and said, "You know what? Actually, I don't think this is what God has for you." And I really appreciated that and respected the fact that, David Nathan originally affirmed David in that, and it seemed like a really good plan. And then he went back to him and said, "Actually, after all, this is what I think is true." And it takes a ton of courage for someone to circle back, to pray about something, to wait to hear from the Lord, and then go back and tell that person something that's going to be disappointing for them to hear.
Yeah, that's helpful, because from a human perspective, maybe putting together, wisdom and understanding God's revealed will about wanting to be worshiped well and such, that he could say, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." And then to have the space, like you were saying, to come back and say, well, things might line up from a human perspective, or even, with biblical wisdom and such, and still God is wanting a different thing. And so there's a humility there as well.
This is total speculation, but it's interesting to think about. I wonder if David's still holding on to the hope that he is going to build a temple, because we see in these battles that he plunders all of these nations, and he's gathering up all of their gold, silver, and bronze. And I wonder if in the back of his head he's still thinking, I know what Nathan said, but I wonder if I can get enough stuff I can go ahead and move forward. We don't know, but he's pulling all that metal together.
I don't know. And I wonder, maybe another perspective could be that he knows it's not him, but he wants to be as faithful as he can with the resources that he has. And so even though he knows he won't be the one building it, he wants to do as much as he can to help the person in front of him, whoever that is, Solomon, but, help his son or whoever. And maybe it's just an act of faithfulness. I don't know.
Yeah, that's good. These two chapters, I think, again, there's some tension here. On the one hand, what I don't want us to ever do is we read through these chapters 8 and 10 and see literally thousands of people either being killed or taken on as servants. I don't want us to read over that and not take in the weight of that. These are humans made in the image of God, who are being either killed or placed into servitude. I want us to feel the weight of that. And at the same time, it is all a plan of God to be putting in place a king and a nation and a people who are his own possession in this land. And so both of those things are held in tension there with chapters 8 and 10, and we'll see it in the weeks to come as well.
And some of that, going back to Joshua, our time in Joshua, of clearing out the land for God's intended use, and that was not completed.
Yeah.
And so some of these battles now are still finishing up what God had called his people to a long time ago.
Either finishing up what God had called them to, or taking them back yet again from the ways in which they've been taken over by the Philistines or whoever, because the Philistines are on the march as well, and we see that over and over.
We didn't really talk about this beforehand, but I thought something that was interesting when...
Oh, this is unplanned.
It's unplanned.
Eric would not
spontaneous.
Like this. Eric would not like this.
I was thinking about when David lined up the Moabites, and he killed 2/3 of them, and he saved one line of Moabites, or a third of them. And it's speculation, but a couple things that came to mind with that is I was wondering if a piece of it was that David's lineage is from the Moabites. And then whenever he was going to live out in the wilderness, he took his parents to the Moabites, and he said, "Will you take care of my parents?"
Yeah.
And I just wonder if there's a piece of him that there was mercy shown to this third of the Moabites, because he does have a family line there from Boaz and Ruth. But then also that's where he took his parents to be cared for as they were elderly, as he was going off to hide from Saul, and he didn't want his parents there. And so I just wonder if there was a piece of mercy given to them because of the kindness they had shown to his parents.
Maybe there's some mercy there, but it's also a power move. And I don't mean he's arrogantly doing a power play, but to line up 3 lines and to intentionally take out 2 and leave 1, it can show mercy and also show the power of the king, that he has the ability to do that. Let's shift gears very strongly toward what's in chapter 9, just shoved in chapter 9, this kindness from David that's shown toward Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son. Jonathan's father is Saul, just to keep that all in mind. And we see the kindness of David extended. That same word is used, that loving kindness that's often used for who God is. I want us to talk some, and maybe this will be the bulk of our conversation to finish this out. What elements about Mephibosheth and that whole story point us to see really strong key elements of the gospel being shown? Does that question make sense? Let's just talk through a bunch of them.
If I
just
could
go.
jump in, that sentence, that first sentence of chapter 9, David is initiating, is there still anyone left? There's clearly, we see in the gospel, God's initiating love. We only respond to God because God has first loved us. And that David is initiating his love for Mephibosheth based on his promise made earlier.
That's good. What else? What else stands out that shows us key elements of the gospel? Not
just that David initiated, but then he sought out Mephibosheth.
Yeah.
And God seeks us out. And, the fact that Mephibosheth had really nothing to offer. He is the grandson of the king who has been killed, and he's disabled. And so especially in that culture, when you were disabled, it was kind of a death sentence.
Yeah.
There was not much that he had to offer the king. And yet David sought him out and said, I want to give you the riches of my kingdom. I want to give you what is good and undeserved.
Yeah.
And that's the same that God does for us.
I think another element related to that, Kirsten, if we keep in mind the family line, Mephibosheth is actually the grandson of an enemy, and that God would move toward an enemy, or that David would, shows us this picture of God moving toward. While we were still sinning against him, he moved toward us. So I think we see that there as well. What else? Anything else stand out?
Just was thinking about the wording that David saying that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake. There's a sense of God extending us forgiveness because of Christ. For the sake of Christ, his death and resurrection for us. That idea of not that Jonathan, in a sense, earned it, but yet that just the idea of for the sake of another.
Yeah,
my benevolence is extended.
And a little bit of a different angle, but the fact that Mephibosheth knew the kindness that was being extended to him. And so...
What do you mean? How do you see that?
What is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I? Yeah. Like, he knew this was all undeserved. He knew that it was not something that he had earned, and yet it was something that David was extending to him. And so I think we can respond similarly when we consider the grace that God has shown us. Like, who are we that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I? That there's nothing that we've done to earn this. There's nothing that we bring to God saying, hey, I know I'm crippled in both feet. I know I'm an enemy. I know I'm not worth much, but hey, would you love me because of this? I mean, even the chapter ends, now he was lame in both feet. It's almost like it's this reminder of, and he didn't have anything to offer. Yeah. And yet David still chose him, and it's the same for us. And so let our response be the same, that, we don't deserve this at all, and yet it's undeserved mercy and kindness from God.
So not only that Mephibosheth didn't have something to offer physically in a sense, but he was also technically a rival. I mean, if Saul not only was, you mentioned, Vince, that he was an enemy of David's, but if David wasn't an heir of Saul, right. So from Jonathan to Mephibosheth, it would have been normal, particularly in that time, for the next king, whoever they were, to clean out any rivals. And so right. Mephibosheth would have had some claim, and David, instead of clearing him out of the picture, actually brought him into his home, his table.
That's good. I think we also see the gospel theme of adoption, that it's said that Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons, so that he's adopted into a family that he does not deserve, and he's not just adopted in, but he's given all of the same rights of the one who has adopted him in, just like we are given the rights to an inheritance that we don't deserve, an inheritance that will never fade away. We're adopted in like that. So we see that of Mephibosheth.
Well, I think God often works through generations, and he saves in generations, family generations, not always, but we see that Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who lived in Ziba's house became Mephibosheth's servants. And so we see that David's kindness was not only extended to Mephibosheth, but also to Micah and the people in Mephibosheth's home. And I think it's often the same, that God, you see generations of families who follow the Lord, and so we see that here too.
That's good. Can I ask, maybe push it a little bit more personal? What about Mephibosheth, and also in that connection to the gospel, do you relate with most? Do you personally see and gravitate toward in the way that he responds or the way that he reacts to that?
I think for me, for years and years, there was this maybe sense of entitlement in me, or maybe I was worth something, and that even just deceiving myself and thinking that I had something to offer God. And I imagine Mephibosheth at one point in his life, before his grandfather was killed, before his dad was killed, probably, even though he was very young, probably had an idea of, I'm the king's grandson, so I'm deserving of something good. And then when Saul was killed and Jonathan was killed and he's disabled and he's in hiding, probably a lot of that pretense was chipped away at in him. And so I think it's been the same for me, of just realizing the extravagant grace of God to save me, just like the extravagant grace of David to extend to Mephibosheth, that it's nothing that I've done and it's nothing that I bring to the table, but it really is simply the mercy and the grace of God.
That's good. John, how about you? Anything stick out? Just personally, how you relate?
A little bit of different angle on this, but I appreciated your comment yesterday, kind of wondering, why did, of all of the potential heirs or descendants of Saul and Jonathan, why was the one that was remaining, was it Mephibosheth, and why was he crippled in his legs? And I think building off of what Kirsten was saying, but it made me just kind of grapple with what does it mean to experience grace. Grace fundamentally is something that's unmerited, and yet we do think about what do I have to offer in return. And I guess maybe turning the tables a little bit, and this is just my personal story of mentioning my wife Sarah, who has dealt with debilitating pain for years, And there's something about me being a caregiver for her. And then sometimes it piles on. Like my son Calvin just had knee surgery, so now there are 2 in the home that need to be cared for this next season. And what does it mean for me to not look at that and feel sorry for myself, but to actually say, I can understand a little bit better what it means to give when there's nothing in return. And then to say, does that help me understand even more personally the lavish grace that God has extended to me? So it's kind of like flipping it backwards. But
that makes sense. I think that's a little bit, I mean, both of you are related to the same way I viewed it. Whenever Mephibosheth is brought to David, he falls on his face and he answers to David, behold, I'm your servant. I can have this mentality at times that understanding the grace and mercy of God and the beautiful picture of the beautiful story of the gospel and how that has implications in my life, I have this perspective of I'm not deserving, and what can I do? What can I do then, God, to serve you or to pay back? Which is what we see of Mephibosheth. He says, I'm your servant. How would you extend this kindness to me? I'll be your servant, which is not, that's counter to the gospel. The gospel says it's not because you could be my servant that I'm seeking you, have sought you, called you my own. It has nothing to do with that. So I think I lean in that direction. I get that with Mephibosheth. That feels like a right perspective. It's not, but it feels like a right. I'm going to bow and be your servant because you've done this, which pushes against the gospel.
And maybe you mentioned this yesterday, I don't remember, but I was just trying to look it up. In 1 Samuel 20, Jonathan and David commit to one another that they're going to care for
one another
and their families.
Yep.
And so this is David following through on a promise that he made to Jonathan. I'm just trying to think if that, even in that, is there a picture of the gospel for us in that? I don't know. I'm thinking on my feet.
You're sitting.
I am. I'm thinking on
your seat,
my rear end.
I mean, the promise is upheld. There is to put it in terms of the gospel, there is a promise of salvation, and that commitment must then be upheld by God, and he upheld it through his son, and that promise has been upheld. So we see that commitment being made as well. Let's land the plane a little bit and move toward, even though Eric's not here, we have to go to his question. But before that, I want to summarize it all. There's a lot here, but the way that I summarized it on Sunday was these 2 points: that we see the king, David, being victorious in his battles. So there was the victory of the king that was clearly seen there. And we also see the kindness of the king. And those 2 things, especially in the way that the victory of the king played out in some very brutal death, the victory of the king and the kindness of the king can seem at times to be at odds. I want to ask you all personally, if you have a leaning in this season of your life right now, you think about the victory of the King Jesus or the kindness of the King Jesus, where do you lean? Do you lean toward one over the other right now?
I think the kindness of the King stood out to me yesterday, and I think what stands out is that the kindness of the King is sandwiched between the victories of the King. And so there's victory, and then there's kindness, and then there's more victory. And the victory has involved a lot of death and fighting and hardship. And yet in the middle of that is God's kindness. And so I think that was the piece that really stood out to me yesterday, because I think sometimes in the challenges of life, it's easy to see how God is is going to be victorious. It's easy to think how he is going to keep his promises, and yet it's also easy to be deceived and think that God's just going to accomplish those things regardless of me or my heart or the hard things that are going on in life. And so we know God's accomplishing things through pain and suffering, and yet to be hit with the kindness of God in the middle of that, to know that his loving kindness is not absent from the victories that are there.
Good. And very Kirsten fashion, you answered both. You said yes.
I didn't say it was
your answer was yes.
unanswerable.
Yeah, your answer was yes. Yeah.
Thinking about our trials, we're all going to be in different places at different times. Sometimes our trials come with a sense of injustice or oppression. Let's think about the early church dealing with the oppression of Rome. The Jews would have been longing for victorious release from oppression or whatever. I think I probably resonate more with Kirsten, though, in the sense of I don't feel a sense of personal injustice, and yet I do feel, and I think our family feels, pain, loss, struggling, and there's a kindness, that longing for that healing embrace, grace, and even, we looked at this a lot, but it's so good. In Revelation 21, he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more, neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. There is a sense of victory there, but I feel that, at least I receive that more as God's tender kindness in our hurt. That's
good. Both of you answered with both, and that was my point in kind of pitting them against each other, is to say that I think at times we feel one or the other more strongly, but I think the beauty of seeing Jesus as our King is that he can be both at the same time, that he can be a conquering, victorious King as he extends kindness and mercy and grace in our time of need, which is beautiful, hopeful. Let's turn to the last question. How does this passage, these 3 chapters, how do these 3 chapters help you see more of God? Is that Eric's question? Oh man,
stirs your affections.
Stirs your affections for God.
Yeah. I think the picture of David with Mephibosheth is beautiful and such a tangible expression of what God does for us. And even in this, though, it's imperfect. And so that God does what David did for Mephibosheth for us and so much more, and that he did it perfectly. And he gave Jesus, and he continues to extend his loving kindness. And so that was a really, tender piece for me that stirred my heart.
Yeah. Will we all say ditto to that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think as we read through this, it's not missed on us that David is the king who God chose and he's victorious, but that he would extend kindness to someone undeserving. I think it stirs my affections because we see ourselves in that.
Maybe just adding one tiny point of further clarity of that. You talked about the word hesed, steadfast love, God's promise-based, covenant-founded love, and that this is a specific example of that loving kindness, that steadfast love that continues. It's a beautiful picture. I think of Sarah, my wife's mother. Carrie would tell this story to her kids at bedtime over and over and over, and then she would tell it to our kids. And so that name Mephibosheth, it's a funny name for kids, and yet it's a beautiful, rather simple picture of being cared for by a loving father.
That's good. Good. Well, thank you. We did it. Does that show that God was gracious to us, or that we can do this without Eric, or both?
I'm going to say both.
Yeah.
In typical
In
Kirsten fashion.
Hey, next week we're looking at chapters 13 and 14. Nope, we're not. We're looking at chapters 11 and 12. Right? Yes. Yeah,
11, 12.
we're doing something. Just read all of it. No, we're looking at 11 and 12 next week. Again, Kirsten mentioned this earlier. If you have ideas for ways we can really get under Eric's skin with him not knowing it yet, let us know.
Vince@thetownchurch.org.
And all of your
Don't
other...
email Eric, because he
not.
should not be checking his
He
email.
won't. He's not.
And
He's
then he'll know that we're plotting against him. So,
not. Yep. Good. All right. Thank you all. Appreciate you.